My name is Colonel Farid Rahmani. I am 43 years old, and on August 18, 2017, I died for 12 minutes after being hit by shrapnel during a battle near the Syrian border. I was a former Iranian army colonel with a 20-year military career and a devout Shia Muslim. What I experienced in those 12 minutes changed everything I believed about God, war, and eternal truth. I was born in Shiraz, Iran in 1974, into a family where military service and Islamic devotion were not just traditions but sacred duties passed down through generations. My father, Major Hassan Rahmani, had served with distinction during the brutal Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, and from my earliest memories our home was filled with stories of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering faith in Allah. The walls of our house displayed his military commendations alongside beautiful calligraphy of Quranic verses, creating an atmosphere where love of country and love of God were inseparably intertwined. Every morning of my childhood began with the call to prayer echoing from the nearby mosque, followed by my father leading our family in Fajr prayers before dawn. As a Shia Muslim, I learned not only the 5 daily prayers common to all Islam, but also the specific reverence we held for Imam Ali and the 12 Imams who we believed were the rightful successors to the Prophet Muhammad. My father would tell me stories of their courage and wisdom, explaining how they had suffered and died for the truth of Islam, and how we too must be willing to sacrifice everything for our faith. When I turned 18 in 1992, joining the Iranian army felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. The military was not just a career for me, but a calling that combined my desire to serve my country with my belief that I was serving Allah by protecting the Islamic Republic from its enemies. During my basic training, I excelled not only in combat skills and tactical knowledge, but also in my ability to inspire other soldiers through my deep religious conviction and personal example of Islamic living. Over the next 20 years, I rose steadily through the ranks, specializing in counter-terrorism operations and border security. My superiors valued my combination of tactical expertise and unshakable religious faith, qualities that made me effective both in leading men into battle and in maintaining morale during difficult deployments. I was proud to be defending Iran against what we viewed as Western corruption and Israeli aggression, believing that every mission I undertook was a form of jihad that would be rewarded by Allah. I married my wife Zahra in 1999, and she proved to be the perfect partner for a military officer dedicated to both country and faith. She supported my frequent deployments without complaint, maintained our household according to strict Islamic principles, and raised our 2 children to honor both their father's service and their religious heritage. Our son Muhammad, born in 2005, showed early signs of the same military discipline and religious devotion that had characterized my own childhood. Our daughter Fatima, born in 2008, was gentle and pious, already memorizing portions of the Quran by the age of 8. The demands of military life meant that I was away from my family for months at a time, serving in various border regions where Iran faced threats from drug smugglers, separatist groups, and foreign agents. During these deployments, I maintained my strict observance of Islamic law, performing my 5 daily prayers even in combat zones, fasting during Ramadan regardless of operational demands, and leading my soldiers in religious observances that strengthened both their faith and their unit cohesion. But as the years passed and I witnessed more of the violence and suffering that plagued our region, small cracks began to appear in my previously unshakable certainty about the righteousness of everything we were doing. I saw innocent civilians caught in crossfire between different factions, children orphaned by conflicts they had no part in creating, and families destroyed by sectarian hatred between Sunni and Shia Muslims who claimed to worship the same God. Have you ever believed something your whole life, only to feel something deep inside, whispering that it might not be true? That's the position I found myself in during my 30s, as my military experience exposed me to realities that were difficult to reconcile with my understanding of Allah's will and Islamic justice. I remember one particular operation in 2015 when we were pursuing drug traffickers along the Afghan border. Our intelligence indicated that the smugglers were using a small village as a staging area, but when we raided their compound, we discovered that they had been forcing local families to store their drugs by threatening to kill their children. The villagers were not criminals but victims, yet several of them died during the firefight that followed our assault. As I knelt beside the body of an elderly man who had been caught in the crossfire, I found myself questioning whether Allah could truly be pleased with operations that resulted in such innocent suffering. These doubts became even more troubling when I witnessed the brutal sectarian conflicts that were tearing apart Iraq and Syria. Sunni and Shia Muslims were slaughtering each other with a ferocity that seemed to contradict everything Islam taught about the brotherhood of believers. I watched news reports of mosques being bombed during prayer time, of religious scholars being assassinated for belonging to the wrong sect, of children being taught to hate other Muslims based on theological differences that most of them could not even understand. During my prayers, I began asking Allah for guidance about these contradictions, but the answers I received seemed to lead only to more questions. The Quran spoke of mercy, compassion, and justice, yet the Islamic world around me was consumed by violence, hatred, and revenge. I told myself that this was simply the result of human weakness and corruption, that true Islam was peaceful and merciful, but the evidence of my own eyes made this explanation increasingly difficult to maintain. My religious duties as a military officer required me to lead my soldiers in prayers and to provide them with spiritual guidance during difficult missions. I continued to fulfill these responsibilities faithfully, but I began to notice a growing sense of spiritual emptiness in my own heart. The prayers that had once filled me with peace and strength now felt mechanical and routine. The Quranic verses that had once inspired me with their beauty and wisdom now seemed distant and abstract. I tried to compensate for this growing spiritual dryness by increasing my religious observances. I spent more time in prayer and meditation, studied Islamic theology more intensively, and even made a pilgrimage to the holy city of Qom to seek guidance from senior clerics. Yet none of these efforts succeeded in restoring the sense of divine connection and purpose that had once defined my relationship with Allah. The most disturbing aspect of this spiritual crisis was that it seemed to be affecting my ability to lead my men effectively. A military officer must project confidence and certainty, especially in combat situations where hesitation can mean the difference between life and death. But how could I inspire my soldiers with faith in a cause when my own faith was becoming increasingly uncertain? By 2016, I had begun to suspect that something fundamental was missing from my understanding of God and His will for humanity. I had spent my entire adult life serving what I believed to be a righteous cause, yet I felt spiritually empty and increasingly troubled by the gap between Islamic ideals and Islamic reality. I continued to perform my duties as a colonel and as a Muslim, but deep inside my heart, a quiet voice was questioning whether there might be more truth available than what I had been taught. August 2017 brought new orders that would take me farther from home than I had been in years. Iranian intelligence had discovered that ISIS was planning a major infiltration across our border with Syria, intending to establish terrorist cells within Iran itself. As one of the army's most experienced counterterrorism officers, I was assigned to lead a special operations unit tasked with preventing this infiltration and eliminating any ISIS fighters who had already crossed into Iranian territory. The mission briefing took place in Tehran at the Ministry of Defense, where senior officials outlined the gravity of the threat we faced. ISIS had been losing territory in Syria and Iraq, but this made them more desperate and unpredictable. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning spectacular attacks within Iran to demonstrate that they could strike at the heart of the Shia Islamic Republic they considered heretical and illegitimate. I was given command of 25 elite soldiers, hand-picked from various units across the Iranian army. These were not ordinary conscripts, but professional warriors who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments our military could offer. Most were married with families, young men in their 20s and early 30s who shared my commitment to defending our homeland against foreign threats. Leading them was both an honor and a heavy responsibility, knowing that their wives and children were counting on me to bring them home safely. The journey to our forward operating base near the Syrian border took 2 days by military convoy, traveling through increasingly desolate terrain as we moved away from Iran's populated centers toward the wild borderlands, where smugglers, terrorists, and foreign agents operated with relative impunity. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Rocky hills baked by relentless sun during the day and swept by cold winds at night, with sparse vegetation and no reliable water sources for miles in any direction. Our base was a fortified compound that had been established specifically for this operation, surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire, with watchtowers providing 360-degree observation of the surrounding area. The facilities were Spartan but functional: barracks, a communications center, a small medical facility, and a command post where we could monitor intelligence reports and coordinate with air support if needed. The heat during those August days was almost unbearable, regularly reaching 120 degrees Fahrenheit even in the shade. The soldiers and I had to maintain peak physical readiness while dealing with dehydration, equipment malfunctions caused by extreme temperatures, and the constant stress of knowing that enemy fighters could appear at any moment. Sandstorms would blow through regularly, reducing visibility to mere feet and coating everything with fine dust that got into weapons, radios, and every piece of gear we carried. Despite these harsh conditions, I maintained the religious observances that had anchored my life for over 40 years. 5 times each day, I would call my unit to prayer, and we would perform our Islamic duties together, facing toward Mecca across the desert expanse. These moments of prayer provided structure and spiritual focus amid the chaos and uncertainty of our mission, reminding us that we were serving not just Iran, but Allah Himself. On the evening of August 17th, I received intelligence that a large group of ISIS fighters had crossed into Iran about 30 kilometers from our position and were moving toward a small village where they apparently intended to establish a base of operations. The report indicated at least 15 heavily armed terrorists, including several who had received advanced training in explosives and urban warfare. We needed to intercept them before they could reach the village and potentially take civilians hostage. I spent that night planning our operation, studying satellite imagery of the terrain, and coordinating with air support units that could provide backup if we encountered more enemy fighters than expected. Before trying to get a few hours of sleep, I called Zara on the satellite phone, hearing her voice and the excited chatter of our children in the background as they competed to talk to their father. "When are you coming home, Baba?" little Fatima asked, her 9-year-old voice filled with the innocent confidence that her father could handle any danger and would always return to her. "Soon, my sweet daughter," I told her, though I had no idea when this mission would end or what tomorrow would bring. "Be good for your mother and remember your prayers." Mohammed, now 12 and beginning to show the serious demeanor of a young man, asked about my mission and whether I was fighting the enemies of Islam. I told him that I was serving Allah and protecting our family and our country, just as his grandfather had done during the war with Iraq. After saying goodbye and expressing my love for them all, I performed my final prayers of the day and tried to rest before what I suspected would be a dangerous operation. August 18th began before dawn with final preparations for our patrol. We checked weapons, communications equipment, and medical supplies, ensuring that every soldier understood his role in the operation we were about to undertake. I led my men in group prayers, asking Allah for protection, wisdom, and success in our mission to defend Iran against those who would harm innocent civilians. Our convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles carrying the 25 soldiers under my command, plus additional ammunition, medical supplies, and communications equipment needed for an extended operation in hostile territory. The plan was to intercept the ISIS fighters before they could reach the village, using superior training and equipment to neutralize the threat with minimal risk to Iranian civilians. The journey to the intercept point took us through particularly treacherous terrain, with narrow mountain passes and rocky outcroppings that could easily conceal enemy positions. My years of experience in this region had taught me to be constantly vigilant for signs of ambush, but the intelligence reports had indicated that the ISIS fighters were still moving toward their target and had not yet established defensive positions. At approximately 10:30 a.m., we were traveling through a narrow valley when the attack began without warning. The first explosion destroyed our lead vehicle instantly, killing 3 soldiers and blocking the path ahead. Almost immediately, automatic weapons fire began pouring down from the rocky heights on both sides of the valley, trapping our convoy in a carefully prepared kill zone. The volume of fire was far heavier than what 15 fighters could produce, indicating that either our intelligence had been wrong about the enemy's numbers, or they had received reinforcements that we had not detected. Rocket-propelled grenades began exploding around our vehicles, and I realized that we were facing a much larger and better equipped force than we had prepared for. Over our radio, I called for immediate air support while directing my soldiers to establish defensive positions using the vehicles as cover. Several of my men had already been wounded by shrapnel and gunfire, and our medic was working frantically to treat the most serious injuries while bullets continued to fly overhead. During the height of the battle, I noticed that Corporal Hosseini, one of my youngest soldiers, had been trapped under the overturned rear vehicle when an RPG explosion had flipped it completely over. He was conscious and calling for help, but his legs were pinned beneath the heavy armored chassis, and enemy fire made it extremely dangerous for anyone to attempt a rescue. Without thinking about my own safety, I ran through the crossfire toward Hosseini's position, knowing that he would die if someone didn't get him out from under that vehicle immediately. As I reached him and began trying to lift the wreckage enough for him to crawl free, I heard the distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round. The explosion occurred directly beside us, sending a large piece of jagged metal shrapnel deep into my chest. The impact knocked me backwards several feet, and I immediately knew that the wound was fatal. I could feel massive internal bleeding beginning as the shrapnel had torn through my heart and lungs, making it almost impossible to breathe. My soldiers dragged both Hosseini and me to cover behind one of the remaining vehicles, where our medic began working desperately to stop my bleeding, but I could feel my strength draining away rapidly, and my vision began to blur as my body went into shock from blood loss and trauma. The sounds of the battle around me began to fade, as if I was hearing them from a great distance. My final thoughts were of my family and a prayer to Allah. Receive my soul as a martyr who died defending Islam and Iran. Then my heart stopped, and everything went completely dark. The next moment of awareness came, with the shocking realization that I was floating above the battlefield, looking down at my own motionless body lying behind the overturned vehicle. Blood was spreading in a dark pool beneath me, and my uniform was torn and bloody from the shrapnel wounds. The medic was still working frantically over my corpse, pressing bandages against the massive chest wound while shouting for the helicopter evacuation that we all knew would arrive too late. I could see everything with perfect clarity from my position suspended about 20 feet above the scene. My soldiers were continuing to fight courageously against the ISIS ambush, returning fire from defensive positions while trying to protect their wounded comrades. The battle was turning in our favor as Iranian air support arrived and began targeting the enemy positions in the surrounding hills, but I realized, with strange detachment, that this victory would come too late to save my life. What stunned me most was that I felt completely awake and alert, more conscious than I had ever been during my physical existence. I could hear every word being spoken below me, see every detail of the ongoing firefight, and understand exactly what was happening, yet I was clearly dead. According to everything I had been taught about Islamic theology, this should have been the moment when the angels Munkar and Nakir appeared to question me about my faith before escorting me to paradise as a martyred soldier. I tried to call out to my soldiers below, to let them know that I was somehow still present and aware of their situation, but no sound emerged from whatever form I now possessed. When I attempted to reach down and touch the shoulder of my radio operator, who was coordinating the airstrikes, my hand passed through him as if I was made of nothing more substantial than air. Corporal Hosseini, whose rescue had cost me my life, had been successfully freed from under the vehicle and was being treated for his injuries. Seeing him alive and receiving medical attention brought me a sense of satisfaction that my death had not been meaningless. Yet I was deeply troubled by my continued consciousness when I should have moved on to whatever afterlife awaited a faithful Muslim who had died in jihad. As I watched the medic finally stop his resuscitation efforts and pull a blanket over my face, I heard my radio operator calling headquarters to report my death. "Colonel Rahmani is down," he said, with a voice heavy with grief and respect. "Request immediate evacuation for KIA and wounded." The finality of those words hit me with unexpected force, even though I could see my own corpse lying motionless below. Suddenly, I felt a powerful force beginning to pull me away from the battlefield. It was not a physical sensation exactly, but rather like being drawn by an irresistible current that I had no ability to control or resist. The scene of the battle began to fade from view as I was transported through what appeared to be empty space at tremendous speed. The movement accelerated until I was traveling faster than seemed possible through absolute darkness. This was not merely the absence of light, but a profound emptiness that seemed to swallow hope itself. There were no reference points to indicate direction or distance, just endless black voids stretching in every direction I looked. The silence was equally complete, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced during my years of military service in remote and desolate places. As I continued moving through this terrible emptiness, I gradually became aware of sounds in the distance that made my soul fill with dread. There were voices, but they were not speaking in celebration or praise, as I had expected to hear in paradise. Instead, I heard crying, wailing, and desperate calls that seemed to echo endlessly through the darkness. Some of the voices were calling out in Arabic, and as I listened more carefully I could make out specific words and phrases. Allah, Allahu Akbar. Some were crying, but their tone was not one of worship but of desperate pleading. Other voices were repeating La ilaha illa Allah, the fundamental declaration of Islamic faith, but they sounded like prisoners calling for help, rather than believers proclaiming their devotion. The realization that these were the voices of Muslims, who, like me, had expected to find paradise, but had instead found themselves in this realm of spiritual darkness, shook me to my very core. These were people who had followed Islamic law, performed their prayers, made their pilgrimages, and lived according to the teachings of the Quran, yet they seemed to be trapped in a place of abandonment and despair. I called out Allah, Allahu Akbar, but there was no answer, only silence. Have you ever felt completely abandoned by the God you thought you knew? That's exactly what I experienced in that spiritual darkness. Every prayer I had ever offered, every act of religious devotion I had performed, every moment of faith that had sustained me through 43 years of life seemed meaningless in the face of this overwhelming emptiness. The voices continued around me, and I began to recognize the anguish in their cries. These were souls who had believed their good deeds and religious observance would earn them a place in paradise. Yet they found themselves in this realm of spiritual desolation. Some were calling out the names of family members, others were reciting verses from the Quran, and still others were pleading for mercy and forgiveness from a God who seemed not to hear them. I tried my own prayers, reciting the verses that had brought me comfort during my darkest moments as a soldier, but they seemed to have no power in this place. The words that had once filled me with strength and peace now felt empty and ineffective, like calling into a void that absorbed sound without echo or response. As my own desperation grew, I began to understand that my military service, my religious devotion, and my sincere attempts to live as a faithful Muslim had not guaranteed my salvation. If good works and Islamic observance were sufficient for paradise, why was I trapped in this darkness, along with so many other believers who had tried to earn God's favor through their deeds? The spiritual oppression in this place was crushing. All the guilt I had carried about the civilians who had died during my military operations, all the doubts I had suppressed about the righteousness of the violence I had participated in, all the questions I had avoided about the contradictions in Islamic teaching and practice came flooding back with multiplied intensity. I felt completely alone and abandoned, cut off from the God I had served faithfully and from the family I loved more than life itself. The darkness seemed to be pressing in on me from all sides, and I began to fear that this emptiness might be my eternal destination, that I would spend forever floating in this void of spiritual desolation. But just as I was beginning to accept this terrible fate as my deserved punishment, something extraordinary happened that changed everything. A light appeared in the distance, cutting through the absolute darkness like a sword of pure radiance. This was not ordinary light like sunlight or artificial illumination. This light was alive, pulsing with energy, love, and holiness that I could feel even from far away. The moment this light appeared, the oppressive spiritual atmosphere that had been crushing me began to lift. The voices of despair around me grew quieter, and I felt a warmth beginning to flow through my soul that was unlike anything I had ever experienced during my earthly existence. As the light drew closer, I heard a voice speaking my name with infinite tenderness and love. "Farid," the voice said, and immediately I knew that this voice knew everything about me, not just my name and my military service, but my every thought, every secret struggle, every moment of doubt and faith that had marked my journey through life. "I have always loved you," the voice continued, and the love in those words was so pure and overwhelming that I began to weep, with a mixture of relief and wonder that such love could exist. As I drew closer to the magnificent light, I began to make out a figure within the radiance that took my breath away completely. It was a man with Middle Eastern features similar to my own, wearing robes of the purest white that seemed to glow within a light. His presence radiated an authority and power that exceeded anything I had encountered during my military career, yet at the same time he emanated a love and gentleness that made me feel completely safe and accepted. The moment I saw the scars on his hands and feet, I knew with absolute certainty who was standing before me. This was Jesus Christ, the one Muslims call Isa al-Masih, but I was seeing him in a way that completely shattered every theological framework I had been taught about him. This was not the limited prophet that Islamic teaching had described, nor the defeated figure that I had been told Christians wrongly worshipped. This was the most powerful, most loving, most divine being I had ever encountered. "This cannot be," I stammered, though I was not sure whether I was speaking aloud or simply thinking desperately. "You are Isa al-Masih, but the Quran teaches that you were only a prophet sent by Allah. You did not die on a cross for sins. You did not rise from the dead. Christians have corrupted your true message and made you into something you never claimed to be." Jesus looked at me with eyes that held infinite compassion and understanding. There was no anger or irritation at my theological confusion, no impatience with my resistance to accepting what I was witnessing. Instead, his gaze conveyed a patience and love so pure that it brought tears to my eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ultimate truth, yet it was gentle and kind. "I am Jesus, the one they denied to you," he said with authority that shook the foundations of my understanding. I am much more than your teachers told you, Farid. You have served faithfully according to the light you were given, but there is more light to receive. Your heart was sincere in its devotion to God, but your understanding was incomplete. The love in his voice was unlike anything I had ever experienced during my 43 years of life. This was not the distant, demanding deity that I'd spent decades trying to appease through military service and religious observance. This was perfect love reaching towards me personally, intimately, with a knowledge of my heart that surpassed anything I had ever imagined possible. You served a God of war, but I am the Prince of Peace, Jesus continued, and suddenly I understood the source of the spiritual emptiness that had been growing in my heart over recent years. I had been trying to serve God through violence and conflict, believing that military action against enemies of Islam was a form of worship that would earn divine approval. Yet here was the true God revealing himself as the Prince of Peace, showing me that I had been seeking him in all the wrong places. Jesus raised his scarred hand, and suddenly scenes from my life began to play out around us like moving pictures suspended in the spiritual realm. I watched myself as a young man joining the Iranian army, filled with genuine desire to serve both my country and my God. I saw my wedding day with Zara, the births of my children, moments of joy and love that had marked the best parts of my earthly existence. But then the scenes shifted to show me moments that were far more difficult to observe. I witnessed myself giving orders that resulted in civilian casualties, telling myself that such deaths were unavoidable in the pursuit of military objectives. I saw times when I had felt hatred toward enemies of Iran, taking satisfaction in their destruction rather than grieving over the necessity of violence. I watched myself speaking harshly about Christians and Jews, viewing them as inferior to Muslims rather than as fellow human beings loved by God. Most painfully, I saw the spiritual pride that had infected my religious life. I observed myself feeling superior to soldiers under my command who were less devout in their Islamic observance, looking down on Iranian civilians who did not share my level of religious knowledge, and judging other Muslims who questioned the righteousness of our military actions. I see it now, I whispered, my heart breaking with recognition of how far I had strayed from genuine love and humility. I thought I was serving Allah through military service, but I was often serving my own pride and hatred instead. I condemned others for spiritual failures while harboring violence and prejudice in my own heart. Jesus nodded with understanding that held no condemnation, only infinite patience with my spiritual blindness. You sought to serve the God you knew, Farid, but there was more to know about his heart. You tried to earn his approval through military victories and religious performance, but his love was already reaching toward you before you ever sought him. He gestured, and suddenly I saw visions that completely revolutionized my understanding of God's plan for humanity. I watched Jesus hanging on a cross, but now I comprehended that this was not the defeat of a failed prophet as I had been taught. This was the Son of God voluntarily taking upon himself the punishment that my sins and the sins of all humanity deserved. The crucifixion was not a tragic mistake, but the ultimate expression of divine love. I died for you too, Farid, Jesus said as the vision continued. Even while you served in armies and carried weapons, even while you viewed Christians as enemies, even while you misunderstood my true identity, I was dying for your sins because I love you personally. Every moment of agony I endured on that cross was because my heart was reaching toward you across the centuries, knowing that someday you would need forgiveness for the violence you carried and the hatred you harbored. The weight of this revelation brought me to my knees before him. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn God's approval through military service and religious devotion, never understanding that the price for my spiritual failures had already been paid by someone else. The grace being offered to me was completely undeserved and impossible to earn, yet it was being freely given out of pure love. Then I saw the empty tomb, the resurrection that I had been taught was a Christian fabrication invented to support false doctrine about Jesus' divinity. But now I understood that death could not hold the Son of God, because love is stronger than death, life is more powerful than destruction, and truth will always triumph over human deception and theological misunderstanding. "You are not just a prophet," I said, my voice filled with wonder and surrender. "You are the Son of God. You died for sins, and rose from the dead. Everything I was taught about you in Islam was incomplete." Jesus stepped closer and placed his scarred hand on my shoulder. The touch sent waves of love, acceptance, and peace through my entire being. It was as if every burden I had carried, every guilt about civilian casualties, every doubt about my worthiness before God, was being lifted from my shoulders and dissolved in the light of perfect forgiveness. "Farid, you understand correctly now," Jesus said with joy that filled the entire spiritual realm around us. "I am the way to the Father, the truth you have been seeking through military service and religious observance, and the life that your soul has been hungry for without even knowing it." He gestured around us, and I saw a realm of indescribable beauty filled with people from every nation, race, and background imaginable. What amazed me most was seeing former soldiers like myself, men who had served in armies and carried weapons during their earthly lives, now united in perfect peace and harmony. There were no national boundaries, no religious divisions, no hatred based on the conflicts that had divided them during their lifetimes. You may be a Muslim, an atheist, or a skeptic, but I'm telling you this as a man who has seen the other side. I witnessed former enemies embracing each other with genuine love. Iranian and Iraqi veterans of our brutal war in the 1980s, now standing together as brothers. American and Russian soldiers who had fought proxy wars during the Cold War, now serving side by side in heaven's armies. "This is impossible," I said in amazement. "How can former enemies live together in such peace and unity?" Jesus smiled with infinite love. "Because they understand what you are learning now, Farid. My love is bigger than human conflicts. My peace is stronger than military hatred, and my grace is sufficient to heal every wound that war creates. When people surrender their hearts to me, I give them new hearts that are capable of loving even their former enemies." The magnitude of such transformation overwhelmed me completely. These soldiers had discovered a love so powerful that it could overcome even the ultimate divisions of warfare and nationalism. This was the love that Jesus was offering to me, the same love that was available to every person who had ever lived, regardless of their military service or the violence they had participated in during their earthly existence. Ask yourself this question: if what I saw is true, are you ready to meet him? What if everything you've been taught about earning God's approval through good deeds, religious observance, or loyal service is incomplete? What if the love you've been seeking through performance and achievement has been freely offered all along, waiting for you to simply receive it? As the overwhelming reality of Jesus' love continued to wash over me, I felt a peace and joy that made me never want to leave this place of perfect acceptance and divine presence. The paradise I was experiencing, this freedom from all the guilt and spiritual burden I had carried throughout my military career, was everything my soul had been seeking without even knowing it. I wanted nothing more than to remain in this realm forever, basking in the presence of love that asked nothing of me except to receive it. But Jesus looked at me with an expression that mixed infinite compassion with gentle determination. His scarred hands reached toward my face, and I felt power flowing into me that was unlike any earthly sensation I had ever known during my years as a soldier. It was as if divine energy itself was being transferred into my spiritual being, filling me with strength and purpose that I recognized came directly from heaven. "It's not your time yet, Farid," he said with authority that shook the foundations of eternity. "You must tell them who I am. You have important work to do, and I am sending you back to complete it." The joy I had been feeling suddenly mixed with deep concern as I realized what he was telling me. The paradise I was experiencing, this perfect love and acceptance, this freedom from all the confusion and violence of earthly existence was about to be taken away. "But Lord," I pleaded, my voice heavy with the weight of leaving such perfect peace, "I don't want to go back to that world of warfare and hatred. Here there is no conflict, no doubt about who you are, no struggle to understand your will. How can I return to Iran, where speaking your name could mean imprisonment or death?" Jesus placed both of his hands over my heart, and I felt an even more intense surge of divine energy flowing through my entire being. It was like lightning and warmth combining within my soul, filling me with supernatural strength that I knew would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead. "You must go back and tell them who I am, Farid," he said with unwavering love and determination. "Tell Muslims that I love them beyond measure, that I am not just a prophet, but the Son of God who died for their sins. Tell Christians about my heart for Iranian people, how much the Father loves those who have been serving him through Islam, even with incomplete understanding." The mission he was giving me suddenly became crystal clear, and I understood the enormous cost it would involve. To return to Iran and tell other Muslims that I had encountered Jesus personally, that he was indeed the Son of God, that salvation came through him alone, rather than through Islamic observance or military service, would mean losing everything that defined my identity and place in Iranian society. "My family will disown me completely," I said, my heart breaking at the thought of the pain this would cause Zara and my children. "Zara will think I've lost my mind from combat trauma. My children will grow up ashamed of their father who abandoned Islam. The army will strip me of my rank and pension, and I'll never be able to find work in Iran again." Jesus nodded with understanding that showed he knew exactly what this obedience would require of me. "The price will be very high, Farid. Your military career will end in disgrace rather than honor. Your family may be forced to choose between supporting you and protecting themselves from shame and persecution. Some in the Iranian government will view your conversion as treason against the Islamic Republic." The thought of losing my family, my military career, and my place in Iranian society filled me with anguish that was almost unbearable. I had spent 25 years building my reputation as a loyal officer and devout Muslim, and my family's social standing and financial security depended on my continued success in the military. To throw all of that away for the sake of testimony about Jesus would seem like madness to everyone who knew me. "But you will gain something far more valuable than what you lose," Jesus continued, reading the struggle that was raging in my heart. "You will have the absolute certainty of eternal life with me, and you will have the joy of helping others find the truth that sets them free. Some will reject your testimony and persecute you for it, but others will recognize my voice speaking through your words. Their salvation will bring you more happiness than any military promotion or worldly success could provide." He gestured around us at the realm of perfect light and love that surrounded us. "This is not just your destination, Farid. This is the destination I desire for every person you will meet when you return to earth. Every Muslim soldier questioning why God allows so much violence, every Christian who has built walls of prejudice against Iranian people, every person searching for truth in a world full of religious confusion and political hatred. I want them all to know that my love is stronger than national boundaries and theological differences." As Jesus continued speaking, I felt my resistance to his mission gradually dissolving. The love I had experienced in his presence was too overwhelming and transformative to keep to myself. If there were others who could discover this same peace, this same acceptance, this same freedom from the burden of trying to earn God's approval through military service and religious performance, how could I remain silent about it? "I will give you supernatural strength for what is coming," Jesus promised, his voice filling me with confidence that transcended my human fears. "When you face rejection from your military superiors, I will comfort you with my presence. When your family turns against you and questions your sanity, I will provide new relationships with people who become your spiritual family. When you lose your position and income because of your testimony, I will open new doors for provision and ministry. And when you feel afraid or discouraged by the opposition you face, you will remember this moment and know that I am with you always. Fear not, Jesus said, and I felt supernatural courage flowing through me. I understood that thousands of Iranian Christians were already living underground, practicing their faith in secret, despite the constant danger of discovery and persecution. I would not be alone in this struggle, and the same Jesus who was commissioning me would be sustaining others who had made the same choice. The light around Jesus began to intensify until it became almost blinding in its brilliance. I felt myself being pulled backward, away from his physical presence, away from the paradise I had briefly glimpsed. The sensation was like being caught in a powerful current that I could not resist, drawing me back through the spiritual realm toward the physical world I had left behind. Remember everything you have seen and experienced here, Jesus called to me as the distance between us increased. Remember my love for you, and share that love with everyone who will listen. Tell them that the truth is not a religion to follow, but a person to know, and that person is me. Tell them that I died for every Iranian, every Muslim, every person who has ever served in armies or carried weapons, and that my arms are open to welcome anyone who comes to me. The journey back seemed to happen both instantaneously and over an eternity. I was rushing through dimensions of existence that human language cannot adequately describe, carrying with me the memory of divine love that remained crystal clear in every detail. The encounter with Jesus, his teachings about salvation by grace rather than military service or religious works, the understanding of his true identity as the Son of God, none of it faded like a dream or hallucination would have. Instead, these experiences felt more real and substantial than any earthly memory I possessed. As I approached the boundary between the spiritual and physical realms, I could sense my consciousness preparing to re-enter the damaged body that was lying in a field hospital near the Syrian border. Then, with a violence that shocked every system in my being, I slammed back into my physical form. The transition from the glory and perfection of heaven to the limitations and pain of damaged flesh was jarring beyond description. My eyes flew open and I gasped for air with a sound so loud and desperate that it startled the medical personnel who had been preparing to transport my body. The field surgeon who had pronounced my death 12 minutes earlier was staring at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "This is medically impossible," I heard him tell his assistant. "He had massive internal bleeding and no vital signs for 12 minutes. There should be irreversible brain damage, but his responses are completely normal." As they worked to stabilize my condition and prepare me for evacuation to a proper hospital, I remained silent about what I had experienced, knowing that no military doctor would believe such an incredible account. But the memory of my encounter with Jesus burned in my heart more intensely than the shrapnel wounds in my chest, and I knew that my life as Colonel Farid Rahmani, loyal officer of the Iranian army, was over forever. The medical team kept me in the military hospital in Tehran for 6 weeks, marveling at my recovery rate and struggling to explain how someone with such massive internal trauma could not only survive but heal at an unprecedented pace. The doctors expected complications from the shrapnel wounds, potential infection, and permanent damage to my cardiovascular system. Yet my body was regenerating tissue and healing wounds in ways that defied their medical training and experience. During those long days in the hospital, I spent every quiet moment processing the magnitude of what had happened to me during those 12 minutes of death. The encounter with Jesus remained vivid and unchanged in my memory, more real than the white walls and beeping machines around me. Every detail of our conversation, every moment of overwhelming love I had experienced, every vision of heaven's glory stayed crystal clear in my mind. When Zara finally arrived at the hospital after receiving word about my injuries, I saw in her eyes a mixture of relief, gratitude, and deep concern. The man who had been declared dead after taking shrapnel to the heart was now sitting up in bed, alert and responsive. According to Islamic understanding, this could only be a sign of Allah's special favor on a faithful soldier who had been wounded in jihad. Yet something in my demeanor told her that more had changed than just my physical condition. "The whole base has been praying for your recovery," she told me as she sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand with the tenderness of 15 years of marriage. "The Imam at our mosque says, this proves that Allah has special plans for your military service. Everyone is calling it a miracle and praising Allah for preserving the life of such a devoted officer." If only she knew who had actually performed the miracle and what those plans really involved. For several weeks I wrestled with how and when to share the truth about my experience with her. I knew that this conversation would either destroy our marriage or transform it completely, and there would be no middle ground between those outcomes. During my recovery, I found myself unable to participate in the Islamic prayers and rituals that had anchored my life for over 40 years. When the hospital imam came to pray with wounded soldiers, his words felt empty and meaningless compared to the love I had experienced in Jesus' presence. The Quranic verses that had once brought me comfort now seemed like distant echoes of a truth I had finally encountered face to face. I secretly asked one of the hospital staff to bring me books about Christianity, claiming I wanted to understand the beliefs of Western soldiers I might encounter in future operations. Reading about Jesus in the Bible, with my new understanding, was like discovering a completely different person than the limited prophet I had been taught to revere in Islam. After 4 weeks of internal struggle, I could no longer keep my transformation hidden from Zahra. I chose a quiet evening when we were alone in my hospital room, and I looked into her kind, loving eyes that had supported me through every challenge of our military life together. "Zahra, my beloved wife," I began, my voice trembling with emotion, "I need to tell you what really happened when I died in that battle, something that will be difficult for you to hear, but that I cannot keep hidden any longer." She leaned forward, giving me her complete attention, probably expecting me to describe some detail about the pain or my memories of the combat. Instead, I told her everything: my death, my journey through spiritual darkness, my encounter with Jesus Christ, his revelation about salvation, and the mission he had given me to share this truth with others. As I spoke, I watched my beloved wife's face transform from curiosity to confusion, then to horror and profound grief. When I finished my account, she sat in stunned silence for several minutes, tears flowing down her cheeks as the implications of what I was saying became clear to her. "This cannot be real, my husband," she whispered through her tears. "You have suffered terrible trauma from the battle, the shrapnel, the blood loss, the psychological shock. They have affected your mind. Jesus was only a prophet, nothing more. You know this. You taught this to our children from the Quran." The conversation continued for hours, with Zara pleading, arguing, and desperately trying to convince me that I had been deceived by hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation or post-traumatic stress. She reminded me of my military career, our family's reputation, and the catastrophic consequences that would follow if word of my conversion spread throughout the Iranian military. But I could not compromise on what I had experienced personally. No amount of theological arguments could erase the memory of standing before Jesus and feeling his perfect love wash over my soul. No medical explanations could diminish the reality of the paradise I had glimpsed, or the peace I had found in his presence. Over the following months, as I gradually shared my testimony with trusted family members and close friends, our carefully built life in Iran began to unravel completely. Military chaplains came to visit me, hoping to convince me that Satan had deceived me during my near-death experience. They used every Quranic verse and Islamic teaching they could remember to prove that my testimony contradicted fundamental Muslim doctrine. The crisis reached its climax when my commanding general summoned me to a formal meeting with senior military officials and religious authorities. They offered me one final opportunity to recant my testimony and return to Orthodox Islamic belief, explaining that they understood the trauma I had endured might have temporarily confused my thinking. When I quietly but firmly refused, explaining that I could not and would not deny what I had experienced personally with Jesus Christ, they declared me mentally unfit for military service and began the process of stripping me of my rank and pension. Within weeks, Colonel Farid Rahmani ceased to exist in any official capacity. The persecution escalated quickly beyond professional consequences. Someone threw stones at our house, breaking windows and leaving threatening messages about harboring an apostate. My children faced harassment at school from classmates whose parents had heard about my conversion. Former colleagues began crossing the street to avoid speaking with our family, and shopkeepers refused to serve us. The final blow came when Iranian intelligence services began investigating me as a potential security threat, questioning whether my conversion indicated that I had been compromised by Western agents during my military service. The possibility of arrest, imprisonment or worse became increasingly real as the government decided how to handle a former military officer who had publicly abandoned Islam. That night, Zara came to me with tears in her eyes and pain etched deeply into her face. "You must leave Iran immediately," she said. "There are people in the government who view you as a traitor now, and I cannot protect you or our children if you stay here. If you remain, you will be imprisoned or killed, and our family will suffer for your choices." The decision to leave my homeland was the most painful experience of my life. Yet underneath the grief, I felt a supernatural peace that could only come from heaven. I had lost my military career, my family relationships, and nearly everything that had defined my earthly identity, but I had gained the certainty of God's love that could never be taken away from me. Through an underground network of Christian organizations that help persecuted religious minorities, I was able to flee first to Turkey and eventually to Armenia, where I was granted asylum. The journey was dangerous and difficult, but I carried with me the promise Jesus had made that he would provide for my needs and give me strength for whatever challenges lay ahead. Several months after my arrival in Armenia, I was baptized in a small church by a pastor who wept as he heard my complete testimony. The congregation, which included several other former Muslims who had come to faith through persecution or divine encounters, welcomed me as a brother and helped me begin building a new life founded on the truth I had discovered. My new mission became sharing my testimony with anyone who would listen, whether Muslim or Christian. Despite the constant danger that Iranian agents might target me for assassination, I found opportunities to tell individuals and groups about my encounter with Jesus, always emphasizing that God's love transcends national boundaries and religious traditions. I once fought for a faith that led me to death, but now I live for the one who conquered death. Every scar on my body is a reminder of the battle that ended my military career and the grace that began my spiritual life. Ask yourself this: if what I saw is true, are you ready to meet him? I was a colonel who commanded soldiers, but Jesus is the commander who conquered death itself. His name is Jesus. He is the truth, and he loves you more than you can imagine. Look inside your own heart right now. Are you serving a God of war, or do you know the Prince of Peace? I learned that the greatest victory isn't winning battles. It's surrendering to the one who won the ultimate battle over death. Death in war revealed life in Christ, and his name is Jesus.